Thank you. So, for those of you who don't know, I'm Kimball Cartwright, and I'm going to talk a little bit about creating thriving communities. Can you hear me back there in the back okay? Thanks. So, I want to start with the story that's been keeping me up at night. It's a story about the town of East Haven, Connecticut. It's about 3 miles away from where I live in New Haven, Connecticut. And it's a community, it's a predominantly white Italian community for the past few decades that in the past 10 years has seen a huge influx of Ecuadorian immigrants. And these immigrants have come in and they've been actually fairly successful. They've set up businesses along Main Street, and many of them have been quite successful. But here's the thing, is that it's impossible to drive down that section of Main Street if your skin is darker than mine and not get pulled over by the cops. 2 years ago, a local priest was in one of these immigrant-owned stores and was filming some police harassment and got it on tape. Now, the video was actually confiscated, but it caused a furor, and it launched a Department of Justice investigation. So, almost 2 years later, this January, the Department of Justice came back and said, well, we've got some findings here. We've said, yes, in fact, the police department has been unfairly harassing Latinos in the town of East Haven, and we're going to arrest these 4 police officers for having done so, and we're going to place the chief of police under continuing investigation. So, justice finally on its way for East Haven, right? Here's the thing that caught my eye. On the day that those police officers are being paraded in front of the cameras and getting arrested, the mayor was being interviewed, and the reporter asked him, so, Mayor, what are you going to do for the Latino community today? And the mayor responded, I might have tacos for dinner, I don't know yet. So that's been keeping me up at night. And I tell the story because it's a fantastic way to illustrate an important concept that I want you to understand as I'm going through about how to create thriving communities. The difference between, and I'm going to look over here now, the difference between technical problems and adaptive challenges. Technical problems are ones that we have the expertise to solve. Adaptive challenges are the ones where we need to learn something new. We don't have the expertise available in our community to solve it right away. And I want to go further and say that being able to solve adaptive challenges is going to be a core competency for communities everywhere going forward in the 21st century. And I want to highlight that the technical problem in the example of the town of East Haven is that there were some Latinos that were harassed by police officers. So the solution, right, is to arrest the police officers and send them to jail. Problem solved. Except that the underlying system problem is still there, which is that Latinos don't feel comfortable living in East Haven. So you've got an adaptive challenge that's still persistent, doesn't address the total issue. Now, adaptive challenges are important because all of the social and environmental challenges that we face in the next 10 years or so are going to be adaptive challenges. They're going to require that we learn something new as communities to be able to get through them and to solve them. Things like, where will we have enough water? How will we deal with global climate change on a local community level? And where will we have enough healthy food to eat? So my practicum took a look at the people and the processes that they use to take people through community change processes. How do they get people together to tackle adaptive challenges and learn together how we're going to solve these adaptive challenges? So here's what I'm going to talk about. What are the important aspects of community change processes that lead to them being effective? Where are the 2 areas that perhaps they fall down most often, and how can we guard against that happening? And I want to talk a little bit about the mindset that a facilitator of these community change processes needs to be successful. And I'm going to return to the example of East Haven so we can apply all that we've learned here, right? So, here are the 4 things that I've learned about community change processes. You get the right people to the table, you create a shared frame, you make sure that you have lots of conversations, and you measure, measure, measure. So we're going to go into each one of these one by one. So, first one, getting the right people to the table. It's important when you are solving an adaptive challenge that you have representation from all aspects of the system that you're trying to address. So getting the right people to the table means going out and making sure that you've got different people from different aspects of the system coming together to solve the problem. And you'll notice I'm not saying invite the right people to the table. It's more than offering an opportunity to participate. It's about getting all elements of the system to the table to work on a shared problem. And then one last thing, when you get everybody to the table, you have to make sure that you ask, so who isn't at the table yet? You really need to ask this question on a regular basis so that you make sure that all elements of the system are represented. And then you want to create the shared frame. And what I mean by frame is we are bombarded by information every day, right? And so we create these frames to filter out only the most important information and pay attention to that. Well, when you're dealing with an adaptive challenge where a community has to learn together, you have to create a shared frame through which can enter a lot of information that maybe many people in the community are excluding from their awareness. So you have to create that shared frame. And to do that, you need to have the presence of a mutually acceptable mediator who can help the community have those, or organization, have those conversations that matter and guide people through to getting to that shared frame. And then you need to have lots and lots of conversations. Now, there's a variety of different, there's a lot of discussion about what conversations you need. These are 5 good ones. This comes from a sociologist from Chicago, John McKnight. He's been in the field of community development for a long time. But you could substitute other words in there for the conversations that I've listed. What's important is that when you get down to the commitment level, that all aspects of the system own the problem. Everybody at the table says, I have played some role in making the existing situation unacceptable, and I own that I will play a role in making the upcoming situation, the vision for the future, a better place. Measurement's the 4th key component of a successful community change process. And I was talking to a guy from the Interaction Institute for Social Change, a man named Curtis Ogden, who some of you know. He told me it's important that you not just measure the results of your work, but that you also measure relationships and process. And that's often what gets missed in community change processes. And we'll come back to that in a little bit. So in my research, these are the 4 things again, right? In my research, I noticed that there are 2 areas that trip these community change processes up a lot. And that's inclusion and engagement. Inclusion is really about how do you ensure diversity? Because to get to that learning space, you need to make sure that all stakeholders are at the table. But how do you convince people to spend time with folks they disagree with when it's so much easier to reach a unanimous decision when you can just get rid of opposing viewpoints, like these people have done? It's a difficult issue, right? Because regarding engagement, it's difficult to convince people to spend the time that's needed to say, yes, in fact, I am partly responsible for the existing situation being unacceptable. And that's a difficult place. So I don't have any easy answers, but what I do want to point out is that it's important to approach this with a network frame of mind. A network frame of mind so what's a network, right? It's basically connections between people. And so a network frame of mind takes the picture that's on the left on this slide, and says, how can these people be more connected? And ends up, after a process, with the picture that you see on the right. The important thing is that the network grows stronger over time. And I want to show you a few more examples of the difference between operating through a network lens and a more traditional lens that we operate with all of our organizations and schools and communities, which is a hierarchy lens. Now this is a busy slide, but what I want you to pay attention to is that the dimension of change process column on the left, when you look at things through a hierarchy lens, you're definitely seeing things differently than when you are looking through a network lens. And you'll see that looking at these different elements of the change process through a network lens, you're going to tackle inclusion and engagement directly. You're not going to take them for granted. So let's go back to the example of the city of New Haven. This is a picture of the mayor and a group of us bringing 500 tacos a couple days later to the mayor. So the mayor got a lot of people riled up with his comment, right? But he also created an opportunity, a window of opportunity for us to start having these conversations. People became aware that there's a little bit more going on than a few corrupt police officers. So, let's start by identifying the adaptive challenge. And what I'd like to suggest in this case is that more than just a specific instance of harassment, there are patterns of behavior here that are poisoning relationships in the city of East Haven. So, let's get the right people to the table. And the right people certainly include people from the mayor's office, right? And the police department. But they also include business associations. They include perhaps people from senior centers, people that are going to be coming from a variety of different aspects of East Haven, Connecticut. You want the schools there, you want young people, you want parents. The point is also that as you're gathering all of the people together, you want to make sure you've identified somebody within each of these sub-networks who has the influence to bring other people from those sub-networks to the table for these conversations. Then we need to create a shared frame. So I'm going to say a little bit more about what I mean about poisoning relationships throughout the community. And what it comes down to, right, is perhaps the frame is structural racism. There are a lot of different ways to think about structural racism. This is one. And what I would suggest is that we do some sort of an activity, such as a World Cafe, which many of us have done in classroom. And many of you may want to go read about later on. It's a fantastic activity that really cross-pollinates ideas and conversations amongst a wide range of people in a fairly short amount of time. And that World Cafe may be how we can make this frame of structural racism stick for future conversations. So we've got to have multiple conversations in the end, right? There's going to be disagreement. There's going to be conversations where people say, I'm scared of what's going on. But we're also going to have very positive conversations about what the future will look like. And we need to get there. And to get there, people will have to take ownership of their role in the situation. So, on the measurement side, how will we know if this is working? Well, let's imagine that we set some benchmarks by interviewing everybody that attends the World Cafe event. And perhaps we do some follow-up phone interviewing with different census tracts throughout East Haven to try and establish what are the degrees of connection between different groups in East Haven to begin with, so that we have something to strive for. We can even create those sort of network diagrams that you saw earlier with certain areas where we see that there aren't any connections yet. And we can strive to make that picture change over time. Process-wise, we want to make sure that we know whether or not our World Cafe has actually worked to establish the frame. So we'll want to set up some metrics there also. Has the World Cafe resulted in something that sticks for the community? Can we continue to discuss this through a lens of structural racism? And then results are important also. We'll want to take a look at the police department. We'll take a look at City Hall and school policies to see what changes as a result of having these multiple conversations over time. So there are 4 things that I've learned, and a 5th thing, which is to make sure that you're operating from a network frame of mind when you're looking to develop thriving communities. And I guess I want to end with saying that community change is not magic. It can happen, but it doesn't just happen because the time is right. There's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes ensuring that some things are happening. And I'm hoping that we will all have success in going forward and making the community change that we want to build also. And I want to see if you have any questions.